Hi. Here's why I think it's important to understand biblical culture and context and then how to respond to it. I think when we see what culture was back then versus like comparing it to what it is today, it kind of helps us step back and realize like the authors had so many different intentions and like they wrote how they were, like how the audience is going to take things differently. And so some things like all the histories and laws that were written back then are still good knowledge, but they don't necessarily apply to us since we don't have those same rules and standards in our lives today. I think when we can step back and see the context like of the Bible and like what was happening around it, it shows us like the author's purposes, goals, intentions, and everything like that. I think it's important to dive into the history because when you see their ways of life and how they operated, it kind of just shows like, even though they lived so similar, they also lived so differently than us. Very different government systems and how just ways of life operated around there. And then when you are able to see that, then you can, I think, step back and see why it's important and why like it gives it more meaning, I guess. So when you have more knowledge, then I guess different Bible passages are going to mean more to you because you understand what's going on and then you just grasp it a lot better. Like, for example, like all the feasts and banquets, like when you don't understand how the context and how they operate, like you're like, why are, for example, weddings like so long? And like we today might think like, oh, like that's crazy, but even though back then that was just their custom and norm. So like to the audience then when they're reading, like that makes complete sense to them, even though it's so different for us today. And to respond to the point where it says, is it possible to read the Bible responsibly without knowing and appreciating the words behind the text? I think that's a loaded question. I think you can still understand things and get the main concepts of them, but I think your understanding will be a lot shallower. I think if you are able to like do deep dives and like understand like what's going on in the passage, like in the background, that's where like on the first page of the book in my Bible, it has like the overview and the history and the author, and like I find that really helpful to start out reading before I like begin reading that book, because it just helps me like make different connections and whatnot throughout reading the text. And then I think that will then develop the text and just show, it just makes it easier to understand when you know like the background, because then you're not questioning things, and then it just helps it make more sense. Yeah.